Welcome to Day 2 of the Warsaw Security Forum 2014. Our first panel of the day will look at whether EU-NATO border states are part of a new security wave in Northern and Central Europe. This panel will also identify threats to European security and also try to determine if we're looking at the return to deterrence. We encourage you to debate.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming to this terrific event, which I hope will be now an institution in Warsaw. This has been a wonderful beginning. I just got here last night, and I have to tell you, I made it to the gala dinner. I'd like to congratulate our organizers and our hosts, especially Kasia and Zbyszek Pisarski, for putting this show on for all of us. My name is Andrew Mikta. I'm Professor of International Studies at College and Adjunct Fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. And we're here today to talk about what is happening to the security in the region. I have invited to this panel, and I will introduce our guests in a second, people both from what we traditionally call Central Europe and also people from the Baltic Sea region. And this panel is structured this way for a reason. I would submit to you that we're looking at a transformed security environment, both because of what is happening in Ukraine, because of Russian aggression in Ukraine, but also because of the overall trends on some key issues, like what is happening to the process of NATO enlargement, what has happened to the process of EU enlargement. In effect, we're looking at the emergence of a new, hopefully not permanent, but a new boundary, a new fault line almost across Central and Eastern Europe. And the people who will be talking about it are the people who are exactly in this region, who can take an inside view of the challenges that are going to face us in the future. Just two housekeeping issues before I introduce our panelists. I will first introduce them to you, and they will be seated here on the podium. I will then ask each one of them to answer a couple of questions, very broad questions about the security landscape that has developed. We will go through that round, and then I will follow up with 2 or 3 additional questions that I have prepared, trying to focus the conversation on 4 or 5 selected issues, but within that perspective ranging from different countries. Most of the value for us is your input and your questions in the discussion. So when we have gone through these 2 rounds of conversation, I will then turn over the conversation to you, and I would encourage you to ask questions, preferably directed at specific speakers if you could, so that we can get as much dialogue, a seminar-like setting in this conference room here today. So let me introduce our guests to you today. Let me invite to the podium first Dr. Andrii Deshchytsia, then Dr. Jiři Schneider, Mr. Szabolcs Takács, Mr. Marijus Velička, and Dr. Paweł Kowal. I will be seated here in the corner, so please arrange yourself as you will. And let me do the host's duty here by giving you a brief outline of their biographies. They're also available in the program if you want to read a more detailed description. Dr. Andrii Deshchytsia, he was appointed Acting Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine since January to June 2014. Starting in 2012, he was the Ambassador at Large and Special Representative of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe and Chairperson in the Office for Conflict Resolution. He represented Ukraine in Finland and Iceland as ambassador and was the spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. He's been counselor of the Embassy of Ukraine in Poland and Finland. He has a master's and a PhD in political science. Mr. Szabolcs Takács has been dealing with Asia and the Pacific and the Middle East regions at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Hungary for over a decade. He has served at Hungarian missions overseas. In 2012, he was appointed Deputy State Secretary of the Ministry responsible for global affairs. Since 2012, he was appointed, since July 2013, he has served as Political Director and Deputy State Secretary for Security Policy supervising joint EU foreign and security policy while being responsible for Hungary's bilateral relations with the countries of the Americas, the Balkans, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia. Mr. Jiři Schneider, he's currently Program Director of Prague Security Studies Institute, served as First Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic from 2010 to 2014. From 2005 to 2010, he was a Program Director of the Prague Security Studies Institute, and he was formerly head of the Policy Planning Department of the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He also served as Ambassador of the Czech Republic to Israel from 95 to 98, and was International Policy Fellow at the Open Society Institute in Budapest in 2002, and an MP of the Czechoslovak Federal Assembly from 1990 to 1992. He's a graduate of Czech Technical University, holds a diploma from the University of Cambridge, and he has been, on a personal note, a friend of mine. We've known Jiři for quite some time. Dr. Paweł Kowal, he is a political scientist by training, a historian, a prominent Polish politician, columnist and expert on Eastern policy. He is currently affiliated as assistant professor in the Institute of Political Studies of the Polish Academy of Sciences. Dr. Kowal previously served as member of the European Parliament from 2009 until 2014, where he was chairman of both the delegation of the EU-Ukraine Parliamentary Commission and of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Dr. Kowal was also a member of Poland's National Security Council from 2007 to 2009, and was a member of Parliament, the same, from 2005 to 2009. From 2006 to 2007, he was also Secretary of State in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And a very special note, Dr. Kowal was a co-founder of the Museum of the Warsaw Rising in Warsaw, and he is the author of numerous books and publications, and continues to engage in the political debate in Poland. Mr. Marijus Velička, he is Vice Minister of National Defense for the International Relations and Cooperation of the Republic of Lithuania. In 2003, he graduated from the Law University of Lithuania with a master's degree in law, and in 2010, he founded Velička, Brazaitis and Partners Attorney's Office and became a member of the Labour Party in 2010. Since February 2013, he has been the Vice Minister of National Defense of Lithuania. Mr. Aivars Purinš, Director of the Security Policy Department in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Latvia. Mr. Purinš his role in foreign affairs began in October of 2014. Prior to this, he spent over a decade working at the Latvian Ministry of Defense. He served as Director of the Defense Planning and Analysis Department from 2009 until September of 2014. From 2007 until 2008, he worked as an academic specializing in security studies at the Baltic Defense College in Estonia. This followed 4 years in Brussels at the Latvian Defense Ministry representative at NATO, and from 2003 to 2007, his first roles in the Defense Ministry were as head of the long-term planning and analysis section and as a senior desk officer in the budget and investment planning section. He holds a Master's of Science in Global Security from Cranfield University in the United Kingdom, as well as a Master's of Social Science degree in Economics from the University of Latvia in Riga. Let me set up the stage here for all of us with one very fundamental question. You bring to the table, to the conversation, a wealth of expertise of having worked on not only foreign affairs, but also on defense issues. If I were to ask you to describe the current security environment in the region, what would you see as a #1 challenge that's confronting us all? Take your national perspective, look at it from the point of view of your country, and tell this audience, if you were to say, we are now confronting a series of threats, what would those principal threats be? And let me start with the other end of the panel. So, Aivars, if you don't mind, I will begin with you, and we will we'll go from there.
Good morning. I'm heard. Thank you for the honor to actually start and open up the discussion. And I don't think it's, I mean, it's the one thread would be a simple one, and I could just finish there. But I will just give maybe a little bit outlook shortly, as you asked, as we see in Riga. And firstly, I appreciate the title of the panel today because you know, the geopolitics basically is a little bit, you know, uncomfortable term, but I think we've been too long for the last decade or more trying to ignore geography. We're trying to kind of wish it away. And we've been kind of brought back to face it and recognize it. Looking at the, you know, Russia's aggression in Ukraine, we don't see there anything tactical, exceptional, or something that's something become accidentally. The laws, norms have been ignored, you know, and that's all recognized and stated. The spheres of influence has been continuously argued to be a guiding principle of international kind of life from Russia's side. And there's great disbelief or ability not to accept that people's free will or choice actually exists. Clearly, Russia wants to play a zero-sum game. And for her to win in this game, she needs somebody to lose. And just last week, spokesperson of Putin asked NATO to promise that Ukraine will not make a choice. So basically, not even asking Ukraine, but asking NATO for benefit on regards Ukraine's future choice. Security guarantees, I mean, been shown to be easily a small obstacle. International organizations been, you know, in this zero-sum game shown as almost powerless. Economic interdependencies, that is what is based in EU or thinking and how we organize, and sources of power, is basically a source of power for us, is basically a source of insecurity in this zero-sum game. So in this regard, just finalizing up, and I know you want to give other people words to say some words, is obviously, we need to build deterrence. We need to invest in our defense. We have to return to maybe almost forgotten aspects of border security, which we hoped, again, the geography, we hope that we can wish it away. And it's not just hard security. Obviously, that we have to be strengthening institutions that defend our values, principles. And maybe the two last points, it would be, there was yesterday an active debate. Is it what's happening in Ukraine is something local, you know, something for the former Soviet Union or for the countries of Russian-speaking countries, or where the population of Russian speakers are? I mean, that would be a great mistake to look at that. And one just can read. Yesterday there was a newspaper in the hall describing a lot Russia-China's cooperation and explanation of Russia, why it's important for her. If one would look at observers in Donbass for the pseudo-elections, you would find a nice group of extreme left and right, and all basically that unite them would be their objection to norms and values in Europe. And if we would even accept for a moment that there is something local, that's something, you know, only for Ukraine, then would that make, you know, right morally or legally to occupy somebody else's territory? I don't think so. And finalizing up, we basically, as a collective body of nations, have to recognize we will be required to have a patience and united resolve, and probably the important word is united. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Paweł, how do you see it from your perspective?
Dzień dobry Państwu. Przygotowałem sobie takie 3 punkty kluczowe punkty do swojego
Just a second,
wystąpienia.
Paweł, just one
of
second,
course,
let people
of course.
put on their headsets. Yeah.
I speak in Polish. 1 second, of course. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Understood. Yeah. Of course.
Okay, I think we're all set. Gotowe.
Thank you so much. Thank you. 3 points. Sorry. Trzy kluczowe punkty, które moim zdaniem na tym etapie są wykonalne i które poprawiłyby jakość dyskusji o bezpieczeństwie w naszej części Europy i w naszej części świata. Interpretować, prognozować i odstraszać. Pierwszy problem, z jakim się stykamy obecnie, to jest problem interpretacji tego, co się dzieje oraz narzucenia naszej interpretacji. Chodzi na przykład o sprawę całego dyskursu Rosji na temat bezpieczeństwa, która mówi tak: jeżeli Zachód poprze czy przystanie na to, że Ukraina zrezygnuje ze swojego statusu neutralności, to musi dawać Rosji nowe gwarancje. Ja nie słyszałem, żeby ktoś z polityków europejskich albo natowskich powiedział Rosji tak: jeżeli Rosja nie poinformowała Zachodu o swoich nowych umowach, które dotyczą rozlokowania nowych wojsk na Białorusi, to znaczy, że Rosja narzuciła nowy system bezpieczeństwa w Europie Środkowej. I my tylko odpowiadamy, mówiąc i potwierdzając i dając parasol polityczny dla Ukrainy, że Ukraina może sama podejmować decyzje co do swojego statusu bezpieczeństwa. Ta sprawa jest zresztą kluczowa przy dyskusji o warunkowości. Mówi się dzisiaj w szerokim kontekście ukraińskim, musimy podyktować Ukrainie warunki, na jakich Ukraina otrzyma pomoc z Zachodu. Ja odpowiadam tak: niech to będzie nowy plan Marshalla. Niech tam zostaną spisane szczegółowe warunki. Ale warunki dotyczą także drugiej strony. W takim planie Zachód nie tylko daje pieniądze, ale także daje parasol bezpieczeństwa dla Ukrainy i gwarantuje relatywnie to bezpieczeństwo. Od momentu powstania formatu normandzkiego Zachód, a szczególnie Unia Europejska, same przedziurawiły ten parasol. Abdykowały ze swojego podstawowego zobowiązania. Wracamy do problemu narzucania interpretacji w sferze bezpieczeństwa i interpretowania zachowań Rosji. Bardzo ciekawy punkt. Ja od lat obserwuję uważnie to, co mówi i słucham tego, co mówi Władimir Putin. Nie wiem, czy to się tutaj pojawi, czy zostanie uznane to za jakąś niepoprawność polityczną, ale na ile go znam, za często mówi o broni nuklearnej. I po Władimirze Putinie można poznać, jakich używa analogii historycznych. Zbyt ostatnio się tam gdzieś za często wkradał Chruszczow i metoda Chruszczowa. Pytanie, czy na tym etapie my mamy odpowiedź na różne warianty. Przechodzę do drugiego punktu. Prognozowanie. Dzisiaj wszystkie polskie media od rana trąbią, że zmieniła się polityka Niemiec wobec Rosji. Ja mówię tak, widzę pewne tendencje zmiany, ale w zasadniczych punktach się nie zmieniła. Te zasadnicze punkty to decyzja o tym, że polityka bezpieczeństwa wraca na poziom Unii Europejskiej i NATO i że żadne z państw członkowskich nie prowadzi jej bez wyraźnych pełnomocnictw na własną rękę. To się nie zmieniło. I druga rzecz, nie zmieniła się fraza Steinmeiera i Merkel, która mówi, musimy budować bezpieczeństwo tylko z Rosją. No właśnie błąd przed Krymem i przed zestrzeleniem samolotu 17 polegał na tym, że nie rozważaliśmy różnych wariantów. A ja w takim razie pytam, okej, tylko z Rosją, to jasne. A jeśli Rosja definitywnie nie chce? Albo na przykład jeśli Rosja zaatakuje masowo konwencjonalną bronią wschód Ukrainy, to także tylko z Rosją? To znaczy, że dzisiaj Zachód na poziomie prognozowania wariantów stać wyłącznie na jedno rozwiązanie, które jest po prostu trywialnym politycznym zdaniem, za którym nic się nie kryje? Pytanie zatem, czy w naszej części Europy może powstać dzisiaj nie instytucjonalny think tank, ale think tank ad hoc, poważnych ekspertów, którzy nie będą się bali postawić prognoz od najbardziej optymistycznej do prognozy pesymistycznej i pokazać kluczowym postaciom politycznym w tej części Europy, że muszą reagować w zależności od rozwoju sytuacji, a nie zaklinać rzeczywistość i żądać wariantu, który dzisiaj jest stosunkowo mało realny, bo Rosja nie chce brać udziału w żadnym wspólnym systemie bezpieczeństwa. Przechodzę do trzeciego elementu. Efektywnie odstraszać. W polityce to oznacza odpowiednią retorykę polityczną. Można się nauczyć od Putina. Putin nigdy nie mówi, co na końcu zrobi na 100% albo czego nie zrobi. Pokazuje, że ma różne warianty. Tego brakuje dzisiaj w polityce Zachodu, jeśli chodzi o retorykę polityczną. Zachód mówi, my na pewno czegoś nie zrobimy. Ja też się szczerze mówiąc nie spodziewałem, że NATO wyśle samoloty do obrony wschodnich rubieży Ukrainy. Ale w momencie, kiedy polityk wychodzi i mówi, na pewno nie zareaguje, stwarza przestrzeń do ataku. W sferze gospodarczej. Mówimy tutaj o sankcjach. Politycy Zachodu prześcigają się dzisiaj w deklaracjach, że jakichś sankcji nie będzie. Należy postępować odwrotnie. Mówić, że wszystko jest otwarte. A potem ewentualnie rezygnować z jakichś instrumentów. I wreszcie odstraszanie militarne, czyli, to jest najtrudniejszy punkt, czyli czy w Europie Środkowej jesteśmy w stanie w taki sposób zmienić program zbrojeń, żeby posiadać pewne typy broni, na przykład rakietowej, które przynajmniej na poziomie minimalnym będą miały znaczenie odstraszające. Na przykład jeśli chodzi o możliwości odpowiedzi w rejonie północnej, z rejonu północnej Polski, tu są lepsi specjaliści od spraw technicznych. Dzisiaj takich broni nie mamy. Czyli interpretować, prognozować i odstraszać. Dziękuję.
Thank you so much, Paweł. Dziękuję bardzo. Marijus, if I were to turn this over to you, from the perspective of the country and the region, do you agree with what has just been stated, and what aspects would you highlight in the overall security situation? What is the most important thing?
Good morning. Well, I absolutely agree what my colleague just said. But before I will start with analyzing the situation, I want you to understand one thing. We're totally different from Russians. We're totally different with the mentality from Russians. The thing that was mentioned correctly is that the mentality or the position of Russian man stands there. What he said, he must do. So if Mr. Putin says he's going to do something, that means he's going to do something. If we look over the history, if we look over his speeches 5 years ago, you can all find there. He was telling us about that, what he's planning to do. When it comes to Western countries, we are talking a lot, but we're doing not that much. Actually, we talk a lot of what we will do, or even of what we will not do, and we don't. And Putin does. So another thing, what happened in Ukraine, actually, I will put it not delicately, there is a war going on in Ukraine. And the fighting sides are not Donetsk and Luhansk republics, it's Russia against Ukraine. And how do we see that? From Lithuanian perspective, do we see it as a threat to Baltic states? Yes, of course we do. The one thing that we know from history is what Russia did till this moment, it was attacking only the countries it can win against. Take it 2008, 2009, Georgia. It's the country they can win against. What happened after that? There was slight confusion in European Union, people were shocked. But 4 months later, everything was back to business. Everything was going normally. The same thing is in Ukraine. We hear about go back with normalization with the relations with Russia. Yes, we do hear these talks. Will it happen? Maybe, but I hope not. So the thing is that who will be the next on line? How Mr. Putin sees that? All our sanctions, all our gravely concerns about the things that are in there, he sees it as a weakness. We see it as a diplomacy. We see it as a political solution. He laughs at that. So another thing, who is next on line? Belarus, Kazakhstan, Baltic states? Yeah, why not? So another thing is, yes, we are very much concerned that it can happen in Baltic states, not today, not tomorrow, not 2015 maybe, but I don't pop the question like this, will it happen to Baltic states? The answer, yes, it will happen to Baltic states. The question is, when? Today, Putin is not able to confront NATO countries and NATO power. But with the budget he spends, 2015, 4.2 of GDP, by 2020, 75% of all the military modernization, modernized. The time will come, 2017, maybe 2020, when he will have enough power to confront NATO, and if he will still be in power, which I'm absolutely pretty much sure that he will, if we won't do anything, he will do that. So, from the perspective of Baltic states, Poland, being an eastern countries, I see it as a very much big threat for us, and I think we need a lot of deterrence to have in there. If we can have the troops in Baltic states, in Poland, American troops, NATO troops, and that would deter Putin of making a move, that's the best thing we can have. But the thing is that if something will go wrong between NATO and Russia, the soil where all these things will be happening will be Baltic states and Poland, not Italy, Germany, United Kingdom. It will be on our land. So that's why we think we need more troops in there. And this is normal. If you know where your enemy comes from, it is normal that you keep your sword and your armor near this place, right? So in this matter, I think we should look at this from a strategic point of view as a threat that will appear. Maybe not in the soon future, but will appear. And I think we should start from here, talking about that, how to stop it. Now, when it comes to Russia, Putin has 85% of support of his society. Do you know that Russian people get all the information, 85% of all the Russian information is spread to the society through television? Do you know any single station in Russia which is not loyal to Kremlin or which is not affected by Kremlin? I don't know that. So actually all the information he produces is very much efficient and very much reaching the final destination is the ears of Russian people. So he has that support. And can we change that? Can we influence on those people? No, we can't. Because they don't speak English, or mainly they don't speak English, those 85% who support them. We can only influence on the people who surround Putin by influencing on their finances, influencing on their way of life. Yesterday it was very correctly mentioned. Where does the Russian oligarch put their money? Was it China banks? No, it's Western banks. Where do they educate their children? Is it China? Is it Moldova, wherever? Or Armenia? No. They're educated in West. Where do they buy property and where do they stay? It's in West. So this is the things we should talk about that. These are the sanctions should be. We must affect the people who can influence Putin. Not those poor people who watch TV and get their opinion from that, but the people who can influence, who may not be comfortable around the things that are coming and they can change it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marijus. Szabolcs, does it look the same way from Hungary? I mean, is there a same sense of intensity of threat, or is the perspective somewhat different?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Strange as it might sound, but we have a very identical approach to security, despite perceptions around my country and some other countries in the European Union and also in NATO. A couple of points, maybe three basic points, also referring to what has been said. Definitely, the security environment has changed ultimately in our part of the world. The very assertive behavior of Russia has rewritten our perception of security, and there are very obvious and clear signs of it. If you look at the latest summit of NATO in Newport, Wales, I think this is a historic summit because NATO has returned back to the basic principle when the alliance has again become a military alliance with a leverage as a military alliance. If you look at the history of NATO, and we all remember the time when we were talking about in connection with NATO, if we said that it's out of area or out of business. So when NATO had to find a mission, going on expeditionary mission, Afghanistan being the largest one in its history, and also in peacekeeping missions. But now NATO has become back to the core, collective defense, send a very clear message to those who are threatening any member state of the alliance and the territory of the alliance. And I believe that while we are fully understand the concerns of our friends in the Baltic states and Poland, we believe that Article 5 is, not only should be, but it's very definitely, very ultimately a clear deterrence to Mr. Putin. Now, talking about Russia, I think it's a huge disappointment what has happened, because we all believed that Russia can be a cooperative partner. If you look at the history of the late 1980s, early 1990s, when Russia was part of creating a new security architecture in Europe, Helsinki process, becoming a member of OSCE, becoming a member of the Council of Europe, signing the Budapest Memorandum 1994, we all believed that this is a new Russia that we can cooperate with. So everybody just settled into a peaceful era. Now this is what Mr. Putin has rewritten. Now, of course, we should analyze why it has happened and what is the dynamics of a mindset of people like him. I believe that people like him always need enemies. And if there are no enemies, then they create one. And if you look at his first presidency, the enemy that he had to defeat was the Russia of the early 1990s, where Russia was weak. And then he made his own people believe that Russia is back on track, back on the agenda of international politics. And then during his second presidency, the enemy is the West, because he believed that with his policies and with this naive approach of many partners in Europe, well, former members of the Soviet Union, former allies like us in Central Europe, now have become members of other alliances, EU and NATO. He started to attempt to divide us. And you know what I believe is that the biggest headache for Mr. Putin today is not the sanctions that we decide upon in Europe, the European Union. Sanctions that, of course, we have to implement, because we must make him understand that everything has a price. But these are not the sanctions that are hurting him much, but the realization that the European Union and NATO countries do unite, and they are united. And the decisions that we made in Newport and the decisions that we are making in the European Council are a clear signal to him that we are united, despite his perception that he can divide us. And the rhetoric that he's using and the propaganda war that many of us referred to even yesterday, certainly is trying to jeopardize this unity, undermine this unity, create a perception that there is division. There is no division. And of course, we all know, we are fully aware of the perception around my country. But as a part of the NATO decisions in Newport, for the time being, the military presence, my fine colleague from Lithuania is talking about, then the need of foreign troops in Lithuania. Yes, it's absolutely a necessity. For the time being, there are 2 NATO allies which are having troops on the territory of Lithuania. One is the United States of America, and the other one is Hungary. So I think these things speak for themselves. And of course, we are vulnerable to this perception that we could cooperate, or we believe that we can cooperate with Russia. And of course, in a security forum, when we are talking about hard security and military threats, it's important to analyze every dimension of it. But security has other dimensions, like energy security. I think we also have to create a solution, a resolution, which answers the concerns of all the countries of the alliance from every angle of it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Jiři, we're now moving to you. You share the same concerns. Does this look any different from the perspective of the Czech Republic? And as we will then get the voice from Ukraine, from the country that's at the center of it, do you think that the level of unity that has been indicated here is actually there on the response?
Yes and no. Does it work? Yes. Good morning. Great to be here again in Warsaw. Let me start with the broader picture. I think we are at a turning point. Exactly 24 years ago, Paris Charter has been signed of OSCE. And not more than months ago, President of Russia, Putin, said basically that this is for nothing. It's not legally binding, and basically that Russia officially, by occupying, annexing Crimea, it did it. In fact, it officially confirmed that it doesn't stick to Helsinki principles. There were 10 principles in the Paris Charter, and in his Valdai speech, he challenged that. Okay, those who relied on collective security are in bad situation now. Those who, like us, did not rely only on collective security, but invested in integration with European Union and NATO, are better off. We'll come back to Ukraine and other countries which were not that lucky. But that's the conclusion. Of course, it would be great to have a cooperative arrangements with Russia. But this period is for the time being over. And we had not developed early in advance non-cooperative scenarios because, you know, we trusted in cooperative scenarios, so why to develop non-cooperative scenarios? Now we have to develop them. First of all, we must strengthen and uphold the institutions which are still, you know, in our hands. And this is European Union and NATO. Anything which questions them is endangering not only us, but also those who are not in these institutions and who rely on these institutions. Anything which questions our trust and self-confidence in our system, in our liberal system, is playing into hands of those who would like to question our system and our organizations. And that's my caveat to, first of all, my statesmen, the Czech politicians who are not speaking in a clear way, supporting their allegiance to the Western alliance, but also other, like Prime Minister Orbán. I wouldn't say this is the end of the world, but it's not helpful if we are not speaking in, we are trusting ourselves less than others are trusting. This is a shame. If our statesmen are not trusting in the European Union and NATO in the way that, you know, regular attender of Maidan in Kiev was trusting. This is a shame. But it's not the whole thing. We are engaged in a whole set of challenges. It was called a teaser in the beginning. Of course, Russia is teasing us with propaganda, very soft tools, trying to subvert our self-confidence in rule of law, in liberal system, in NATO, that it delivers and it's capable of delivering. But then goes another layers of subversion, which are below the threshold of Article 5. And we have to address them. These are not cases in which the presence of Hungarian or US troops in Lithuania would help. These are scenarios where we have to be able to foster our resilience in law enforcement and intelligence and cooperation in our countries. Of course, the green men are sleeping also inside NATO. We have to be aware of that. They will not wake up until they will feel smell the opportunity. But we have to do it at home. We have to cope with these threats at home. And this is the role of our system and of law enforcement in our countries. That's why my key point is, answer is not only NATO, but European Union as well, in a broader sense of security, because NATO is not covering all the aspects of security. So, of course, in the end, it would be great to have a cooperative arrangements with future Russia, with cooperative Russia. We cannot neglect that. That's a German point of view. But our Center and Eastern European point of view, and this is a point of view from Prague, I believe, regardless of what some people say officially, is that the agreement with Russia shouldn't be made overheads of our nations and shouldn't be made overhead of Ukrainian nation. I mean, that's our historical experience, and we should be we should stick in our policies to that experience. Otherwise, we will fail. So that's my assessment of the overall situation.
Terrific. Thank you, Jiři, for setting it up for us. Andrii, I wanted you to be the last person to speak. I wanted you to hear what the voices were from the region. Please put Ukraine's perspective in that context and tell us what are really the bottom line issues for you.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Będę mówić w języku polskim, może dlatego, że z Pawłem rozmawialiśmy o tym, że mamy 3 punkty, które trzeba wygłosić. I te punkty, które też są ważne dla Ukrainy, są podobne do tych punktów, które byli i tych kwestii, które zostały już dzisiaj omówione. Ale tak jak widzę ja to chciałbym zwrócić uwagę na 3 właśnie pozycje. Swoboda wyboru, nowa realność w systemie bezpieczeństwa regionalnego i relacje z Rosją. Jeżeli chodzi o swobodę wyboru, to chciałem przypomnieć, że akurat dzisiaj jest rok od początku Majdanu. I właśnie Majdan, który stał się dla nas rewolucją godności, potem przerósł w rosyjską agresję. A co było dla nas Majdan? Dla nas był Majdan możliwością wyboru narodu ukraińskiego, jak i gdzie on ma iść i w jaką stronę. Ta strona była Unia Europejska. I naród się sprzeciw, jeżeli ktoś, w tym przypadku to był rząd Azarowa czy Janukowicza, zdecydował za naród, że nie pójdzie Ukraina w kierunku Unii Europejskiej. I to był sprzeciw. Tak samo teraz sytuacja jest w stosunku Ukrainy, przyszłości Ukrainy w systemie bezpieczeństwa europejskiego, czy regionalnego, czy transatlantyckiego. Nie może być tak, że ktoś, Rosja, powie, że no tak, Ukraina może sobie żyć, ale nie może wstąpić do NATO. Nie możemy tego obiecywać, bo nie możemy być tak zależni. To jest decyzja rządu ukraińskiego, parlamentu ukraińskiego i narodu ukraińskiego, co i jak robić w przyszłości. W tym też jest bardzo ważny moment związany z reakcją w Rosji na decyzję ukraińską o przystąpieniu do Unii Europejskiej, o podpisaniu umowy stowarzyszeniowej. Reakcja była zaskakująca. Agresja. Czy tak się robi w czasie w XXI wieku? W czasie, kiedy wszyscy już normalnie, cywilizowanie między sobą rozmawiają? Czy robi się tak w czasie, kiedy Rosja była też współzałożycielem struktur bezpieczeństwa europejskiego? Nie. My mamy prawo na swoją przyszłość i mamy prawo na taką decyzję. Bo jak na przykład postąpi Rosja, jeżeli, może nie dzisiaj, ale za jakiś czas, Białoruś zdecyduje przystąpić do Unii Europejskiej, też agresja? Też aneksja części Białorusi? Na to nie możemy pozwolić. Druga rzecz jest związana z nową realnością w systemie bezpieczeństwa regionalnego. Przyzwyczailiśmy się już do tego, że w tym regionie są kilka zamrożonych konfliktów. I zgodziliśmy się nawet na to, że oni mogą istnieć. I ostatni w Gruzji potwierdził, że no, relacje po tym konflikcie między Rosją i Zachodem no, normalizowali się. Zapomnieliśmy już o tym. I bardzo się obawiamy tego, żeby nie zapomnieć o Krymie, czy nie zapomnieć o Donbasie. I nie możemy do tego doprowadzić, ponieważ tutaj nie jest zamrożony konflikt. To jest very hot spot. I nie wiadomo, w jakim kierunku on może się dalej rozwinąć. Zamrożonym on będzie wtedy, kiedy Krym i Donbas powróci do Ukrainy i kiedy będzie normalna granica między Ukrainą i Rosją. Bo jeżeli dopuścimy do tego, jeżeli przebaczymy w cudzysłowie Rosji, że ona aneksowała Krym, to wtedy otworzymy skrzynkę Pandory. To wtedy i Rosja, i inne państwa też sobie mogą na to pozwolić. No i najważniejsza kwestia to jest relacja z Rosją i budowanie nowego systemu bezpieczeństwa. No, całkowicie się zgadzam tutaj z Jiři, że nie możemy dopuścić do tego, żeby o tym systemie bezpieczeństwa mówiono bez nas. Tak jak mówiono bez Europy Środkowej, czy jeżeli mówimy teraz w tej kwestii o Ukrainie. Bo tutaj nie chodzi tylko o Ukrainę. Chodzi o to, żeby my mogliśmy zbudować ten system, który będzie tolerowany i wyznawany przez wszystkich, w tym przez Rosję. Czy trzeba rozmawiać z Rosją? Dla mnie to jest bardzo trudne pytanie. Chyba trzeba, ale trzeba rozmawiać z pozycji twardej, konsolidowanej i pozycji, która byłaby nie tylko ukraińską, ale która byłaby pozycją Unii Europejskiej i transatlantyckiej. Dziękuję.
Thank you so much. Dziękuję bardzo. I was going to move to a more general question right now on our response, but as I was listening to kind of overall consensus that seems to be emerging here, solidarity, what needs to be done, how we should respond collectively, I'd like to pour some cold water on some of this, gentlemen, and ask you to actually speak directly to this. We're expressing some core principles here that I think we all share. But I tend to say, you know, watch what I do, don't listen to what I say. 4 years ago, the average European defense spending level was 2.3% of GDP. Today it's 1.5%. 8 years ago, the European members of the alliance, of NATO, provided about 50% of all the capabilities. Today they're providing about 22% of all the capabilities. As Andrii so eloquently spoke here, we have a war in Ukraine. We have an invasion in effect and a breakdown of an existing post-Cold War and actually post-1945 normative structure of Europe. We're under assault as a community. This is not just about a territory of a sovereign state. And yet, Europe continues to disarm itself. Europe continues to try to cut side deals, quite frankly. Over the past 10 years, Russia has bought into different sectors of European economies, and we have ready-made lobbies that are pushing against any concerted action to punish Russia. And I will not be pretending that the Americans are pristine. I mean, we have efforts by the Russians to do something very similar in the US, including recent retaining of 2 former US senators to lead a lobbying effort against the sanctions and against Russian money. So I'll be very blunt, gentlemen. We all talk the right talk. Why isn't Europe prepared to do more, to actually put some meat on the bone of that rhetoric? And I'm throwing this open to all of you because I want to invite the audience in a minute. But whoever would like to take this question, and Andrii, you sit and listen because it concerns your country more. I'm challenging them. Right, I'm challenging them. So why this discrepancy between the rhetoric and the reality, especially as Jiři said? We know that the threat scenarios are not just in Ukraine. They're also, as he says, little green men scenario, and there are other scenarios that Sakyrs and others are worried about. Last comment, I just came here from a conference in Vilnius on Baltic and Central European security, and I kept hearing the same question from the Balts, from the Scandinavians, and from the Americans. What does Putin want? How far is this going to go? What does he need? And I keep thinking, we're in a reactive mode. We are waiting for something to happen for us to respond. Why don't we have a proactive strategy? And I think it goes back to my question. We have no resources. So who would like to take this challenge? I am asking, why this gap between what we say and what we do? Okay.
Thank you. Reflections on what you asked. Defense spending. Absolutely, you are right. And I think all the leaders of NATO allies in Europe are aware of the obligations that they have to make. And I think this was another outcome of the latest summit, that we simply cannot expect the United States to pay 50% of the total cost of NATO and our security. So our societies must realize that security comes at a price. And you are right, we have to make credible, concrete steps. Deeds, not only talks. Yesterday I already said that the 2% might be a too ambitious goal at this stage.
Why?
Simply because Europe was hit very harsh by a crisis, a financial and economic crisis that resulted in enormous figures of unemployment. When every second young person in Spain is without a job, I think that's a challenge that the leaders in Spain have to answer and address. So there is not only this challenge. There are other challenges for leaders, and you must also consider that. Otherwise, we are going into a narrative which is far from reality. Now, the gap between the talk and the deeds. Yesterday, somebody put up a question whether policymakers in Washington, of course, we have to consider what is happening there. They are the most influential of our NATO allies. What is their mindset? Are there any options for them on their mind to cooperate with Russia? Or it has changed ultimately? And the mindset has turned towards confrontation. Now this is what we have to see very clearly, first of all. And the change will take time. You cannot expect it to happen overnight. You cannot bring down mechanisms that has been built for the last 25 years. But as soon as there is a clear, very clear direction, I think the alliance will change as a whole and independently.
Okay, terrific. I think Jiři was next. Now I'll move to Marijus and Paweł. Okay.
I think there's a gap in threat perception. We've got, in Europe, we've got used to a very comfortable life. Most of the costs we are spending are social security and not security. And this is what the voters are asking for. There has been a deep crisis which undermined our trust in the system. And we are lured to look to the rich countries whose wealth is based on natural resources and not on production. And I would say our hunger for energy actually feeds and finances those who are threatening us. I think this is a fundamental question, and this is not just Europe and Russia. This is America and Middle East. This is a broader question, and we have to do something about that. But Europe basically is focused on itself. We Czechs, I'm not a frontline state representative here. I mean, it should be some Slovak here, and I will not speak on behalf of Slovaks, but we feel surrounded by a safe environment. Yeah, it's a false perception, but this is the perception. And we've invested into our security because basically this is the approach. I mean, no one else will save you. We've invested in diversification of our energy resources in 90s. It was a terrible fight because nobody wanted, to spend money on something which was not considered necessary. In 2009, we proved to be right. But those countries like Slovakia, Hungary, Bulgaria, who haven't done it in 90s, are not in that good position. So we can feel, okay, I mean, even gas will not threaten us. And so why to spend, why to increase spending in defense and security? There's a huge gap, and here the propaganda and discourse plays very much into that. Because there's no reason, in the end, we have to make agreement with Russia. Everyone would agree.
Okay. Marijus and Paweł, please be brief because I want to open up to the discussion.
When it comes to budget spendings, Lithuania was always the country which was far, far behind. And when the question pops up, I always wanted to be in the darkest corner of the room. Because what we were spending 0.77 of GDP till recently. In 2013, we increased it by 35%. In 2014, we increased it by 35%. In 2015, we will have a double budget that we used to have in 2012. And we have a political agreement, all our parties being in position and opposition, that we will have 2% of GDP by 2020. And believe me, we will have. I'm 100% sure we will have. So that was a wake-up call for our politicians. As it was mentioned correctly, we were living very comfortable lives, not assuming that there is a threat. Right now, till this moment, we were 100% dependent on Russian gas, not till recently. 1 week ago, we have our LNG terminal, which we built it and which cost us tremendous amount of money. But we built it, and right now we have an alternative source. So actually, we take it seriously and we understand these things. But it took some time. So another thing that was mentioned, that we spend a lot of money on social security and all these things, it comes to the idea how you do it, and it comes to the politicians. If the politicians agree that they do have a threat, if they agree that this threat is imminent, you can persuade your people that whatever you do is necessary. If you need to persuade your people that you need to spend more on your defense, it takes some time, half a year, 2 years maybe, but if you will work that, synchronized, you will achieve that. So actually Lithuania did that, I'm proud of that, and by the 2019, while our president will be still in the office, I can guarantee that we will have 2%.
Okay, terrific. Paweł, very briefly, please, and because Andrii has volunteered, and I think we also have Aivars.
Patrzę na Borysa Tarasiuka. Rok temu przyjechałem jako pierwszy polityk z Zachodu do Kijowa. Wystąpiłem na Majdanie, oddał mi i moim współpracownikom swoje mieszkanie i kolację. Pojechał na wieś do swojej daczy. Ile w ciągu tego roku się zmieniło i jaki popełniliśmy błąd? Moim zdaniem podstawowy problem to są rządy strachu w Europie. Politycy boją się powiedzieć, jak jest naprawdę, ponieważ boją się swojej opinii publicznej, bo każdy ma wybory za pół roku lub rok i boją się politycznej konkurencji. A zatem mamy problem w obecnej sytuacji nowego błędu krymskiego. Jestem przekonany, że gdyby właściwie działały instytucje analityczne, a politycy mieli poukładane w głowie, nie tylko w kontekście zbliżających się wyborów, ale także odpowiedzialności za bezpieczeństwo, to na początku stycznia tego roku można było prognozować z dużą dozą prawdopodobieństwa to, co zaszło. Jeżeli wtedy, co się wydarzy, mówił Łuszkow, mówił Żyrynowski, to mogliśmy tego nie brać na poważnie. Ale dzisiaj mówi to Putin. Gdzie mamy o tym mówić, jak nie na konferencji ekspertów? Jasno mówi, jakie bierze pod uwagę warianty. A my szykujemy się tylko na jeden, najbardziej optymistyczny wariant. Idziemy jak lemingi prowadzone na skraj przepaści. Ja ciągle słyszę, że będziemy budowali bezpieczeństwo z Rosją. Tak, jestem też za. Nawet może bardziej. Tylko że to nie jest zgodne polityków, którzy odpowiadają za bezpieczeństwo milionów ludzi w tej części Europy. Błąd krymski zostanie niedługo powtórzony i może być nazywany błędem atomowym. I ktoś to wreszcie musi mówić. Kluczowe jest z punktu widzenia polskiego bezpieczeństwa szybkie wyrównanie relacji z sąsiadami, dlatego cieszę się, że jest ambasador nowy Litwy. To powinno być pierwsze zadanie dla nas bezpieczeństwa w tej części Europy. Jest nowy minister spraw zagranicznych, jedzie na Węgry, ustala z Węgrami, co mamy wspólne, Węgrzy prowadzą się inną polityką, okej, ja się też tym martwię, ale pewne rzeczy są wspólne. Jedzie na Litwę, bo nagle się okaże, ja byłem gotów, ale jeszcze nie odważę się dzisiaj, sam się trochę boję mówić. Jakie można łatwe scenariusze, które ja bym dla Putina wymyślił na przykład w relacjach polsko-litewskich? Wystarczy przejrzeć historię ostatnich 25 lat, tam są wszystkie scenariusze gotowe, napisane. I to jest pierwsze zadanie dzisiaj rządu polskiego i litewskiego, bo to jest dla mnie najtrudniejszy element w tej grze. Szybko to wyrównać. Tu już nie ma żartów. A dla Niemiec, dla Francji, dla instytucji unijnych i NATO przede wszystkim, zaprosić najlepszych ekspertów, przygotować 10 wariantów i grać jednocześnie 10 wariantów.
Okay, allow me for you to be the last one because you wanted to give another comment. So very briefly, please. Aivars.
Thank you. And just to say shortly from Latvia, we had been increasing the defense funding, continuously since 90s. Obviously, the major hitback came on 2008 and 9, and obviously, the security challenges tends to come when the times are bad, not the times when they are good. But I think that and we are now returning. Obviously, we believe that 2% is critical and important objective. And the government, we had just an election, and before and after election, government has continuously said that the defense investment is a priority number one. But just to finalize up, and I just highlight the point by my Czech colleague here highlighted. Obviously, the defense is not the only part of the solution, defense funding, and just to mention that. Throughout that economic crisis, obviously, the one major decision or understanding was made. We have to be getting quickly as possible into the euro, just to take a number of risks away from our state and deal with the next one. So, as I already mentioned, for example, energy security. Thanks.
Okay, Andrii?
I will try to be really brief. And we don't have to wait until Russia will do something new. Will question the security guarantees in Europe, for example, Budapest Memorandum or Paris Charter. Russia already done a bad thing, and it's the right time to respond. And the response should be a consolidated position and a new strategy, new security strategy. Russia, it looks like that Putin has a plan, and he is implementing this plan. And at the same time, when I say we, it's in Ukraine, and I think in Europe, we are still thinking, maybe more in Europe than in Ukraine, because Europe is very often very concerned, but not active. In Europe, we are still thinking what we should do, how we should respond on Russia. We don't have to think, we have to act.
Okay, thank you so much. We're now in the question and answer session. Allow me to call on the hands that I see up here. We'll begin in here. Kasia, do we have staffers with microphones? Please. Okay, if you wouldn't mind standing up, identifying yourself, and if you are directing the question to a specific person, please do so. And keep this brief. Do not make long statements.
I'm Boris Tarasyuk, member of Ukrainian Parliament. One fact, Ukraine is the only non-NATO country which participates in all NATO-led operations, the world over, which participates in EU-led operations. And I am putting the question, do you think that by resisting Russian aggression, Ukraine is defending not only itself, but the democratic community? If you think so, my next question is, are you ready to recommend to your respective governments to help Ukraine militarily? Or are you ready to recommend your governments to invite Ukraine to membership action plan? Thank you.
Could I specify, sir, hold on. Could I specify, when you say help militarily, could you explain what you mean by help militarily? Do you mean military weapons sales?
in providing military hardware.
Okay, thank you. Gentlemen? Okay, let me collect a few questions first. Yeah, Fran?
Fran Burwell from the Atlantic Council. I wanted to focus a little bit, not so much on the NATO members, but on and EU members, but looking to Ukraine and Georgia and others. This spring, there will be a review, perhaps a recasting of the Eastern Partnership, which I think we can all agree faces enormous challenges. And I'd like to know what you would like to see from a new Eastern Partnership 2.0 or whatever, and how you would like the United States to engage with that effort, if you would.
Thank you very much. Let me take another question. Yes, ma'am?
Gabriela von Habsburg from Georgia. I actually wanted to pose exactly the same question like the deputy from the Ukraine. Why not giving to Georgia, who is seeking the NATO membership action plan, also map? And this is a sign that could be given to Russia, a very clear sign, which is not so costly and which does not include Article 5, but it would be a very clear sign. Thank you.
Okay, Gary, and let me just move here right here, the microphone, please. Yeah, right in front. Back. He's right here, Mr. Kasparov.
Thank you. We talked a lot about military threats, and naturally this is the greatest concern. But let's not forget, Putin is a KGB man, and he's an expert in hybrid wars. And I wanted to move from security issue into the way Russia has been buying influence, and point at sport associations, as in general international institutions where Russia is pretty active. And this is one of the way of buying influence. And just last night I read news, and would like to hear a comment, that Mr. Platini, the head of the UEFA, European Football Association, is on the way to Ukraine to ask Mr. Poroshenko to accept Russian jurisdiction over Crimean football. I think it's in every country you have examples, as through chess federations, other federations, public institutions. Russia has been buying influence. And I would like to pose the question, so do we recognize that this is also a threat? Because they know how to buy influence to create positive image, or to use these associations now to give this sort of backdoor recognition to the annexation of Crimea.
Very good. Let me stop with questions for a second. Let me come to the panel, and we'll do another round just after that. Who would like to take the first question that is helping Ukraine militarily? If we believe this is a military threat, what are your governments prepared to do? Jiři?
Yeah. If I would be in government, I would definitely argue for providing supply of what Ukrainians need. I would not argue for involvement of the Czech troops. This is my position. And I think that's what the Ukrainians basically needed. That's what the response I was getting when I was in Kiev recently. It's not necessary to send the troops. As for, I think it's up to Ukraine to put the house in order as well. I mean, there's a hell of a lot of things to do in Ukraine. It's a big mess after after Yanukovych's era, and you are in a war, and there is not enough energy to engage both in waging war and doing necessary overhaul of the system. It has to do also with the gas transport system. It's still in the same shape as it was in 2009, where the Czech presidency was dealing with the gas crisis and shuttling between Moscow and Kiev on that. So, I mean, there are things which have to be done in Ukraine. And that's my answer to Fran's question. Of course, European Partnership, Eastern Partnership was drafted. It was a kind of compromise because it's a kind of balance to the Mediterranean. Of course, everybody knew that we have to tailor the program with each country according its will and ambitions. That was always, but there was no agreement inside the EU. Now I hope there is going to be agreement that we have to custom tailor to Ukraine, to Georgia, to Moldova, and other countries. Belarus, interesting. It will be an interesting exercise. US role in this is to help these countries to promote and do necessary reforms which are prerequisite for the association. I think that's the role of the United States, to tell this is not just European exercise, this is what we want. US did best in Europe when it said we are supporting European integration. That was the best thing the US could do. And we have, of course, talked about what kind of European integration, about the details. But in principle, I think that's what US can do. Thank you.
Very good. Marijus, you wanted to jump in on that?
Yes. First question on military help to Ukraine. At this moment, Lithuania, we help humanitarian. My opinion, yes, we should go lethal. Absolutely, we should go. Maybe not with our soldiers on Ukrainian land, but with lethal weapons. That's what I vote for. That's what I would advise. Talking about map to Georgia, well, this is already what happened. Lithuania was always supporting map for Georgia on all the levels, MOD, MFA, presidential. Well, what happened. Today we have to implement what was the deliverables of Wales Summit, and we also very much support 100% what has been done in Georgia. And Russia about buying influence, I think it tries. Maybe not in Lithuania, because as you know, in Lithuania we have maybe up to 6% Russian-speaking minority, so it's quite hard to have an influence on that. And my colleagues from Latvia and Estonia, Latvians have up to 27, Estonians have up to 22, maybe 23. It's easier there, and we see that those things happen. But it doesn't mean that Lithuania is, well, feel relaxed about that. We're always checking all the things. We're always observing all the things.
Paweł, you're shaking your head, and then I'll come to Szabolcs. But let me start with Paweł here.
Pierwsze pytanie. Pomoc militarna. Ona ma przynajmniej 4 poziomy. Pierwszy to jest pomoc w rzeczach cywilnych czysto, czyli żywność, odpowiednie ubrania. Drugie to jest amunicja, trzecie to jest broń, czwarte to jest pomoc wojskowa. Do pierwszych 3 poziomów nie ma przeszkód prawnych. I Polska na przykład powinna nie tylko ze względu na przyjaźń, bo tu nie jest mowa o emocjach, a na zysk, bo mamy bardzo dobre fabryki, które produkują amunicję. Sprzedawać to Ukrainie i pomagać Ukrainie zdobywać na to kredyty w Unii i Stanach Zjednoczonych i w instytucjach międzynarodowych finansowych. To jest z mojego punktu widzenia proste jak mało co. Jeśli nie ma przeszkód prawnych, można zarobić, a do tego jeszcze się poprzyjaźnić. Najlepsze rozwiązanie w polityce międzynarodowej. Partnerstwo Wschodnie 2.0. Mamy taką sytuację. Bazą Partnerstwa Wschodniego były umowy, była kwestia prawna, czyli umowy stowarzyszeniowe i umowy o wolnym handlu. Te umowy zostały zawarte przez 3 państwa. Mołdawia, Gruzja, Ukraina. W związku z tym Polska, bo Polska nie może od tego uciec i nie może z tym czekać do wyborów, powinna zgłosić z partnerami w Europie Środkowej, w tym także moim zdaniem tym razem z Litwą, plan Partnerstwa Wschodniego 2.0. Jego istotą powinny być, powiedzmy w cudzysłowie, plany Marshalla dla wszystkich tych 3 państw, które zawierałyby warunkowość, ale po obu stronach. To znaczy konkretne warunki do spełnienia na przykład dla Ukrainy w zamian za wsparcie polityczne. To powinny być takie skoncentrowane bloki, każda z tych umów powinna być takim skoncentrowanym blokiem, gdzie po jednej stronie siedzi Unia Europejska, Stany Zjednoczone powinny tu być włączone, po drugiej nasi partnerzy na wschodzie, ale gwarantują to także instytucje finansowe. Tam powinien być czas, do czego kto się zobowiązuje i sposób monitoringu i duże pieniądze. Bo grozi nam jaki scenariusz? Tak jak po pomarańczowej rewolucji. My powoli wchodzimy w scenariusz po pomarańczowej rewolucji. Czyli u nas to się mówiło w komunizmie, jaka płaca, taka praca. Czyli to jest tak, że zaczynają się takie połowiczne reformy na Ukrainie, a Zachód tak połowicznie popiera Ukrainę. To jest najgorszy scenariusz z punktu widzenia bezpieczeństwa. Dlatego Partnerstwo Wschodnie 2.0, nie zamiast Partnerstwa Wschodniego, bo z Białorusią, Armenią, Azerbejdżanem trzeba też pracować, jako wyspecyfikowany, oparty o poważną umowę międzynarodową, w której uczestniczą także Stany Zjednoczone i międzynarodowe instytucje finansowe, już nie plan działania, ale całościowy program współpracy na najbliższe 10-9 lat. Dziękuję.
Szabolcs?
Thank you. Some reflections on how we see the enlargement of NATO. I think it's very obvious that these countries which are represented in this panel are very clear advocates of NATO enlargement, including my country, both to the east and to the south. Those aspirants who would like to join, simply for the reason because we would like to see stability and security on our borders. So this is not us, not our countries that needs to be convinced. We are the proponents and are opponents of it in both alliances. I mean NATO and the European Union. And further to what Jiři said, of course, the aspirant countries must implement all the changes, institutional changes, constitutional changes. And thank you for mentioning also gas transit issue, including that. Not to create a pretext for the opponents to advocate against your approximation to NATO and the European Union. But to be fair with you, our countries which have the experience of this transition, we were offered an end-of-the-road reward, and that is European Union membership. Unless we do not offer that to the countries on the Western Balkans or to the East, the transition will be much more different.
Okay. Andrii and then Aivars.
I wanted to respond to the question about our expectations for the Eastern Partnership and NATO, and what options we have. We have easy to, and also I agree that we have a lot of homework to do and a lot of mess in Ukraine that we have to overcome. But for us, what is important to have light in the end of the tunnel. And the options we have is either CIS, custom union, or maybe neutrality and Switzerland example, or which we will never reach, and custom union that we don't want. So what we have European Union and NATO, and we want to have a perspective of membership. And if we have this perspective, then it would be much easier for us to implement the reforms.
Okay, Aivars, very briefly, please.
Thank you. On that first question on support to Ukraine, the one part I can easily say in the sense that we don't have industry, so we really, a military industry, so no, not in practical level we can kind of analyze that, but but still we have committed ourselves to contribute these NATO trust funds, so we hope sooner than later these trust funds, in particular, we are supporting the communication one, so it will deliver also support to Ukraine. As regards Ukraine's the action plan, membership action plan, we are, I already mentioned, and I think the important key issue, that's its choice to be made firstly and foremostly by Ukraine. And Ukraine obviously have currently still a law in place that says that it's a non-bloc country. And I mean, that's her choice, and that's up to her to, orientate itself in the international environment. But again, I just a short division. I tried once look into Latvia's, kind of the last 20 years and find a man who said, oh, Latvia should be in NATO. I mean, I couldn't find, because that was there in air forever. I mean, since early 90s, that we want to be there, and there were never a law saying that we will not be in NATO and so on. So, but that's again, I'm fully defending the choice of Ukraine to be made. Shortly on the Eastern Partnership, I think the two issues would have to be looked and will be challenging. One is basically to recognize that they are different partners, and how do you tailor-make the different policies for them. And secondly, I think again I have to go back to Czech's colleague saying when the current one has written, it was written in an environment of cooperative security. now, once we kind of have to relook this Eastern Partnership policy, we have to be recognizing that there is non-cooperative environment, and how do you write a policy for that environment? And lastly, on the Mr. Sparrow's point on sport, I think it's a challenge. It's a recognized. It's worked on, and Latvia. It's not just sport. It's also culture or music and so on. And we famously in Latvia have put on a blacklist Josif Kobzon and Victoria and the rest of people who are supporting annexation of Crimea. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I know there are questions out there. I've seen lots of hands. I've promised the organizers that I will enforce discipline here, so I apologize to you for not going through another round. This is a large panel and it took a little longer than we had anticipated. But our guests are here, so please engage with them after the panel. Let me first of all thank you for a very frank discussion. I think that